The 3 weeks after we closed on the house were the happiest I'd been in years. And I think that matters. I think you need to understand that Jay and I wanted this place. We weren't desperate. We weren't running from something. We'd spent 11 months looking at houses in 4 different neighborhoods, and when we walked through the door of 414 Garfield Avenue for the first time, Jay looked at me across that ugly living room carpet and said, "This one." And I agreed. Not because it was perfect, because it felt ready to be worked on, and we were ready to be the ones who worked on it. The house was a 1920s 2-story in a neighborhood called Belmont, east side of Dayton. Dense blocks, mature trees, the kind of street where people had been living for 50 or 60 years, and the newer arrivals were people like us, early 30s, some savings, willing to do the renovation themselves if the bones were solid. The bones were solid. Inspector said so. Foundation was good. Roof had another decade in it. Plumbing had been updated at some point in the 90s. The previous owner had died, a man named Gerald Voss, 78, lived alone, no surviving family that the estate attorney could locate. The estate had cleared the house, cleaned it, and listed it below market value to move it fast. We got it for $162. In that neighborhood, for that square footage, it was a gift. Jay took the first 2 weeks of October off from work. I was freelancing at the time, so my schedule was flexible. The plan was to gut the downstairs first, pull up the carpet, strip the wallpaper in the dining room, open up the kitchen wall to see if the layout could breathe a little. We weren't contractors. We were YouTube educated and stubborn, which in my experience gets you about 70% of the way there before you have to call someone who actually knows what they're doing. The carpet came up on a Monday, hardwood underneath, in decent shape. We celebrated with takeout on the bare floor. The wallpaper started coming down Tuesday, 3 layers. Floral overstriped over something mustard-colored that may have been original. Under the last layer, the plaster was cracked in a few places, but mostly intact. Wednesday, Jay started on the kitchen wall. He was using a reciprocating saw to cut the first opening when the blade caught on something and stalled. He backed it out, shined a flashlight through the gap, and said, "Mika, come look at this." I assumed pipe, maybe old wiring. I walked over, leaned in, and looked through the slot he'd cut. The wall cavity between the kitchen and the dining room was about 14 inches deep. Standard. But the space wasn't empty the way a wall cavity should be. Insulation, maybe some dust, a dead mouse, if you're unlucky. Instead, the cavity was occupied, neatly, deliberately. There were objects mounted to the interior of the studs with small wire hooks, the kind you'd use for a pegboard. Hanging from them, spaced with almost compulsive regularity, were items. A single child's sneaker, white with a pink stripe, size maybe 4 or 5. A ring of keys on a plain steel loop, a prescription medication bottle, a small framed photograph, face in, so we couldn't see the image, a leather dog collar, brown, with a tag I couldn't read from that angle. I counted 11 items visible through the slot before the sightline ended. Jay and I looked at each other. He said, "What the hell is this?" And I said, "Don't touch anything," which was the first smart thing either of us said that day. We called the police. Not 911, the non-emergency line. I described what we'd found. They sent 2 officers within the hour. By the time they arrived, Jay had cut a wider opening, carefully, and we could see further into the cavity. More items. Everyone hung with the same wire hooks, the same spacing. Everyone tagged. Small strips of masking tape on each object, with handwriting in blue ballpoint, a date, and an address. The officer, her name was Lozano, looked through the opening for about 30 seconds and then stepped back and called her sergeant. Within 2 hours, the house was a scene. I want to be clear about the timeline because what followed moved fast and we were inside it, not above it. By Thursday morning, a forensic team had opened sections of wall in every room on the first floor. By Thursday evening, they'd moved to the second floor. By Friday afternoon, the count was somewhere north of 300 objects distributed through wall cavities on both levels of the house, all mounted, all tagged. Detective assigned to the case was a guy named Paris, mid-40s, deliberate, clearly uncomfortable with how much attention this was about to draw. Every item was small and personal, not valuable, not the kind of thing you'd steal to sell. A single earring, a reading glasses case with the glasses still inside, a baby's pacifier in a plastic bag, a pocket Bible with a name written on the inside cover, a house key, a dog's vaccination tag. Prescription bottles, those were the ones that made my stomach turn, because prescription bottles have names and addresses and medications printed right on them. You could read a person's private medical reality on a label the size of a playing card. And every single item was tagged with an address within 6 blocks of our house. Gerald Voss had been collecting from his neighbors for at least 15 years. That was the range of the dates on the masking tape. The earliest one Paris showed me was from 2007. The most recent was from 3 months before Voss died. He hadn't broken into anyone's home, as far as anyone could determine. The items were the kind of things that go missing and you never think twice about. A shoe your kid outgrew that you thought you'd donated. A key you assumed you'd misplaced. Glasses you figured you'd left at the office. The genius of it, if you can call it that, was that he only ever took things people wouldn't look for. Things that lived in the margins of awareness. You'd notice them gone the way you'd notice a word you can't quite remember. It bothers you for a day, and then you let it go. 300 intimate objects from an entire neighborhood, mounted inside the walls of the house we'd just bought. The news didn't break for 4 days. Paris kept it tight while the forensic team documented everything. But on the following Tuesday, a reporter from the Dayton Daily News got a tip, and by Wednesday, it was on local television. By Thursday, the first neighbor came to our door. Her name was Donna Kessler. She lived 3 houses down. She was 70 years old, small, precise, and visibly shaking. She asked if it was true that Gerald had been taking things from people's homes, and I said yes, and she asked if anything of hers had been found, and I said I didn't know yet, because the police hadn't finished cataloging, and she stood on my porch and cried. She wasn't crying because something had been stolen. She was crying because Gerald Voss had been her friend. They'd had coffee together every Sunday for 9 years. She'd brought him soup when he was sick. She'd checked on him when he stopped answering his phone. She'd been one of the people who found him dead in his living room. She didn't want to know what he'd taken from her. She wanted to know why. That was the question nobody could answer, and it turned out to be the thing that did the most damage. Over the next 2 weeks, the neighborhood came to us. Not all at once, not in a mob, one by one, or in pairs, always with the same questions. What was taken? What did he know? How long? Some people came angry. A man named Terrence from the next block stood in our living room, which still had exposed wall cavities and plastic sheeting, and told us he wanted the address list made public so everyone could know who'd been targeted. His wife, who'd come with him, said nothing. I found out later that one of the prescription bottles had her name on it. Medication for a condition she hadn't told anyone about except her doctor. That's where it got complicated. Paris and his team were working through the items, matching them to addresses, contacting residents. But some of the items contained information that people hadn't shared publicly. Medical conditions, photographs that suggested relationships, a journal, an actual handwritten journal from a teenager on our block, taken from what must have been a bedroom. The journal was deeply personal, in ways I won't describe. The teenager was now 23 and living out of state. Jay and I talked about it every night. We'd sit on the back porch, which was the only part of the house that still felt like ours, and we'd try to figure out our obligation. We hadn't done anything wrong. We'd bought a house. We'd called the police the moment we found something. We were cooperating fully, but we were also the people holding the map. Every neighbor who came to our door was really coming to ask, what did he see? What did he know about me? And the answer, for some of them, was more than you'd want anyone to know. The decision about what to return and what to suppress wasn't ours alone. and I'm grateful for that. Paris was careful. He contacted people individually. He didn't release a master list. When an item contained sensitive information, he asked the owner how they wanted it handled before anything became part of the public record. Some people wanted their items back. Some people didn't. The woman whose prescription bottle was in our wall asked that it be destroyed. Paris complied. The parents of the child whose shoe was found wanted to see it. They came to the station, not to our house, and they identified it as belonging to their daughter, who was now 14. The mother held the shoe and said, "She loved these shoes. That was all." The journal was the hardest. Paris contacted the young woman out of state. I don't know the details of that conversation, only that the journal was returned to her directly and no copy was made. I hope that's true. Jay handled the practical side better than I did. He's an engineer. He thinks in systems. When the forensic team finished and released the house back to us, he spent a weekend removing every wire hook from every stud, methodically, with pliers and a headlamp. He filled the holes with wood putty. He rehung insulation. He closed the walls. I watched him do it and understood that he was performing a kind of cleaning that had nothing to do with construction. I handled the social side, which was harder. The neighborhood had shifted, not dramatically. No one moved away. No one blamed us. But the texture of every interaction had changed. When I waved to Donna Kessler, I knew that she was thinking about Gerald and about what he'd taken from her, which turned out to be a small ceramic figure from her windowsill, a cat her late husband had given her. She got it back. She put it back on the windowsill. But she told me that now, when she looks at it, she doesn't think about her husband. She thinks about Gerald's hands on it. She said that like she was confessing something. Terrence stopped speaking to us entirely. I don't think it was personal. I think we'd become the physical location of something he didn't want to keep looking at. His wife, Michelle, still waved. She brought us a casserole in November, which felt like a peace offering for a war nobody had declared. There was one night, about 3 weeks after the story broke, when Jay and I almost left. Not the neighborhood, the house itself. We were lying in bed in the upstairs bedroom and Jay said, "Do you feel like we're living in a trophy case?" And I said yes, because I did. The house had been a display. Every wall had been a cabinet. Gerald Voss had turned his home into a museum of his neighbors' private lives, and we were sleeping inside it. I got up and walked through the house. It was 2 a.m. I went room by room, touching the walls. They were closed now. Jay had done a good job. Fresh drywall in some places, patched plaster in others. No hooks, no objects, no tape, just walls. But I could feel the impressions. Not literally, I don't mean anything supernatural by this. I mean I could remember where each cavity had been opened, what had been inside each one, and who it had belonged to. The house had a memory now, and it was my memory. I was the one carrying it. I stood in the kitchen, in the spot where Jay had first cut into the wall, and I made a decision. I decided the house was mine, not Gerald Voss's, not the neighborhood's, mine and Jay's. We'd bought it, we'd found what was hidden, we'd done the right thing with it, and now we were going to live in it, and the walls were going to hold insulation and wiring and nothing else. It wasn't a dramatic moment. I didn't cry. I just stood there in my kitchen at 2 a.m. and felt the decision settle into my body the way a house settles into its foundation. Slowly, and then completely. The investigation wound down over the winter. Gerald Voss had no criminal record, no history of violence, no complaints from neighbors. He'd worked for the city water department for 31 years and retired in 2005. He'd never married. His closest social connection appeared to be Donna Kessler, who was still struggling to reconcile the man she'd known with the collection he'd built. Paris told us, at the final meeting, that in his professional opinion, Voss had not been dangerous. The collection showed no escalation pattern, no evidence of voyeurism beyond the objects themselves, no indication that he'd ever entered a home when someone was present. He took small things from accessible spaces, porches, open garages, yards. He was patient and meticulous, and, by every clinical measure Paris could apply, compulsive rather than predatory. That distinction mattered to some people and not to others. I understood both positions. Jay asked Paris the same question Donna had asked me on our porch. Why? Paris shook his head. I can tell you what he did, he said. I can't tell you why. He's dead. The why died with him. I thought about that answer for a long time. I thought about Gerald Voss, alone in this house, mounting a child's shoe to the inside of a wall stud with a wire hook, labeling it, dating it, closing the wall and living against the other side of it, knowing it was there, knowing all of it was there. 300 pieces of other people's lives sealed inside the structure he slept in every night. I don't know if that was loneliness or something else. I don't know if the collection was a way of feeling close to people he couldn't reach, or a way of having power over people who didn't know he existed in their lives. I don't know if there's a difference. Jay says there is. Donna says there isn't. I think they're both right, which is the kind of answer that satisfies no one. Spring came. Jay and I finished the renovation. New kitchen layout, refinished hardwood, fresh paint in every room. We hosted a block party in April, our idea, not something anyone asked for. We set up tables in the front yard and made too much food, and invited everyone within 6 blocks, which meant we were inviting every household that had been affected. About 40 people came. Not everyone. Terrence didn't. A few others stayed away. But Donna came, and Michelle came, and the family whose daughter's shoe had been found came, and the teenage girl's mother came, the one whose daughter's journal had been taken. She brought a pie. She didn't mention the journal. She asked about our kitchen renovation and told me about a backsplash tile she'd seen at a store on Wayne Avenue. We stood in the yard of a house that had been a catalog of stolen intimacies, eating pasta salad and talking about tile, and that was exactly right. Not because it erased what had happened, but because it was what came next. I still think about the walls. Not every day, not with dread, but sometimes when I'm hanging a picture or running a hand along the plaster, I'm aware that this house held a secret for 15 years and nobody knew. That the man who built the secret was, by every external measure, a quiet and unremarkable neighbor. That the people he took from trusted him, or at least had no reason not to, and that the secret only surfaced because Jay's saw blade caught on a wire hook on a Wednesday afternoon in October. I think about what else is inside the walls of houses I'll never open. What other collections exist in other neighborhoods, in other cities, assembled by other quiet and unremarkable people. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because I think it's true, and because knowing it's true is different from being afraid of it. We live here now. The walls are closed and clean, and ours. Last week Jay mounted a shelf in the living room, and when he drilled into the stud, he paused for just a second, that involuntary catch. The body, remembering what the mind has filed away. Then he finished the hole and hung the shelf and put a plant on it, and we sat on the couch and looked at it, and it was good. That's where I am. In a house I chose, in a neighborhood that knows what the house used to hold, with a husband who closed every cavity and filled every hole and made the walls ordinary again. The street outside is the same street it was before we moved in. The people on it are the same people, carrying the same private lives they've always carried, only now with the slight, permanent awareness that someone was paying attention. I don't know if that awareness made us more careful or more kind. I think it made us both. Donna Kessler still has the ceramic cat on her windowsill. She told me last month that she started thinking about her husband again when she looks at it. Not every time, but more often than before. She said it like it was a small victory, and I think it was. The house is warm tonight. The walls are doing what walls are supposed to do, which is hold the heat in and keep the weather out, and stand quietly between one room and the next. That's enough. That's what I wanted when we moved in, and that's what I have now. And I'm not going to let someone else's obsession become the defining feature of a place I've decided to love. There's nothing inside the walls anymore. I know, because we looked, and then we closed them. And that was the bravest thing we did.